Bible stories. Moses, David, Daniel, Jesus, Noah. Welcome to my channel.
A hand trembles in torchlight, fingers hovering over cold metal, unable to pull away. King Jeroboam stands alone in a chamber, no servant enters, staring at two golden statues he commissioned in secret. The calves gleam in the darkness, their blank eyes reflecting his own. His breath comes shallow. Outside, the kingdom sleeps. Inside, a man drowns in the consequences of his own design. How does a shepherd become a king? By the voice of God and then architect his own destruction? What makes a man hear prophecy from heaven's messenger, receive a torn cloak as a covenant promise, and still choose to build altars of fear? Can you hold a miracle in one hand and a match in the other and burn it all down? This is the story of Jeroboam, a man who received everything from God and lost it all trying to keep it. You'll witness how a divine calling collided with human terror, how a kingdom was won by faith and destroyed by control. You'll see the exact moment compromise became catastrophe and why the only good thing left in his house had to die as mercy. If you want to understand how destiny and tragedy can inhabit the same heart, subscribe and turn on the bell. This story will shake you. The labor camps stretch endlessly under Solomon's sun. Dust rises from thousands of feet, mixing with sweat and the crack of overseers' whips. Men bent double under stone blocks, their backs striped with scars, their eyes empty of everything but exhaustion. This is the glory of Solomon's kingdom, temples rising, palaces gleaming, and the people of Israel breaking beneath the weight of it all. Jeroboam moves through the chaos like a man who understands both sides. He's young, capable, his shoulders broad from years of the same labor, but Solomon noticed something in him, an ability to organize, to lead, to make the impossible quotas almost possible. So they made him a foreman, put him over the labor forces of the house of Joseph. Now, he stands between the throne and his own people, watching men who look like his father, his brothers, his cousins crushed under the weight of one man's ambition. An overseer raises his whip toward an old man who stumbled. Jeroboam's hand shoots out, catches the man's wrist. He's more valuable alive, he says quietly. The overseer sneers, but lowers the whip. The old man looks up at Jeroboam with something between gratitude and accusation. Who are you? His eyes ask. One of us or one of them? Jeroboam doesn't have an answer. Night falls. The camp's quiet. Jeroboam walks alone to a hill overlooking the construction, the temple glowing in the distance, beautiful and terrible, built with the bones of his people. He kneels, not in formal prayer, but in the exalted questioning of a man who doesn't know if anyone's listening. If you see us, he whispers to the darkness, why this wait? If you're the God of our fathers, the God who broke Pharaoh and parted the sea, where are you now? The wind doesn't answer. The stars stay silent. Jeroboam closes his eyes, alone with his doubt. A sound behind him, fabric rustling, footsteps deliberate. Jeroboam turns. A figure emerges from the shadows, an old man with eyes that burn like coals in the darkness. His face is weathered, his beard white, but his presence fills the hillside like thunder before rain. Jeroboam knows him instantly, though they've never met. Everyone knows Ahijah the Shilonite, the prophet whose words come true, whose voice carries the weight of the Almighty. Ahijah says nothing at first. He simply looks at Jeroboam, seeing through him, past the foreman's dust, and into something deeper. Then, without greeting or explanation, the prophet reaches up and tears his own cloak, a new garment, fine cloth, ripping it methodically into 12 pieces. The sound cuts through the night like a blade through flesh. Jeroboam stares. His heart hammers. This isn't normal. This isn't safe. Ahijah holds out 10 pieces of the torn cloth, his hand steady despite his age. Take these, he commands. His voice is not loud, but it carries the authority of something far beyond human. Jeroboam's hands move without his permission, accepting the torn fabric. The cloth is still warm. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, Ahijah declares, and the air itself seems to still. And I am about to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and will give you 10 tribes. But for the sake of my servant David and the city of Jerusalem, which I have chosen, Solomon will have 1 tribe. I am doing this because they have forsaken me and worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites. They have not walked in obedience to me, nor done what is right in my eyes, nor kept my decrees and laws as David, Solomon's father, did. Jeroboam can't breathe. The 10 pieces of cloth in his hands feel like they weigh more than all the stones he's ever carried. King, him, a foreman, a worker, a man covered in dust and doubt. But Ahijah isn't finished. His eyes lock onto Jeroboam's, burning with something between promise and warning. You will be king over Israel. And if you'll walk in obedience to me and do what is right in my eyes, if you keep my decrees and commands as David, my servant, did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. The words hang in the air like a covenant written in starlight. A dynasty enduring like David. Everything Jeroboam never dared imagine, offered freely by the God he thought had stopped listening. But there's something in Ahijah's voice, a weight in the conditional. If you walk in obedience, if you do what is right, if you keep my decrees and commands, the promise is magnificent. The condition is absolute. Before Jeroboam can speak, before he can ask the 1,000 questions exploding in his mind, Ahijah turns and walks back into the darkness. The prophet vanishes as suddenly as he appeared, leaving Jeroboam alone on the hill with 10 pieces of torn cloth and a destiny he doesn't know how to carry. He stares at the fabric in his hands. In the moonlight, the torn edges almost seem to glow. His fingers shake. He looks down at the labor camps below, then up at Solomon's palace glittering in the distance. Everything is about to change. Everything already has. But as he clutches the torn cloth to his chest, a question coils in his heart like a serpent. What happens when Solomon finds out? And deeper still, beneath the wonder and the terror, can I really do this? Can I be what God is asking me to be? The wind picks up, carrying dust from the camps. Jeroboam stands frozen between 2 futures, the one where he trusts the God who just spoke, and the one where he tries to survive what's coming. He doesn't know yet that he'll try to do both. He doesn't know yet that you can't. He folds the 10 pieces carefully, hides them inside his tunic close to his heart, and begins the long walk back to the camps. Behind him the hill stands empty. Above him the stars bear witness, and in the distance, in the palace of the king, something is already beginning to unravel. Word travels faster than fear in a royal court. By morning whispers snake through Solomon's palace like poison and wine. A servant saw something on the hill. An informant heard the prophet's name. Someone noticed Jeroboam's face, the look of a man who's been told he's destined for a throne. The king's advisors gather in urgent council, their voices sharp with alarm. The prophet Ahijah was seen with him. They say he tore his cloak, 12 pieces. It's the sign, my lord, the same sign the prophets used with Saul, with David. One elder, braver or more foolish than the rest, speaks of what everyone's thinking. If the prophet has anointed him and the people learn of it, Solomon sits silent on his throne, the wise king whose wisdom has curdled into paranoia. His father David fought enemies with a sword. Solomon fights them with suspicion and swift elimination. He built the temple, yes, but he also built altars to foreign gods to please his foreign wives. He brought peace, yes, but the peace is maintained by crushing anyone who might disturb it. And now, a nobody, a foreman from his own labor crews, has been marked by heaven as his replacement. Find him, Solomon says quietly. Bring him to me. But Jeroboam is already beguards flood the labor camps, weapons drawn, searching tents and workstations. They tear through his dwelling, finding nothing but tools and worn blankets. His fellow workers claim ignorance, their faces carefully blank. By the time Solomon's men think to search the southern roads, Jeroboam is already 3 days ahead, running for his life toward the one place Solomon's reach doesn't extend. Egypt, a desert crossing, nearly kills him. No supplies, no provisions, just 10 pieces of torn cloth hidden against his skin, and the terrifying certainty that if he stops, he dies. His lips crack, his throat burns. At night, collapsed under stars that offer no comfort, He pulls out the cloth pieces and stares at them. Are they real? Did it actually happen? Or did he imagine the whole encounter, a desperate worker's fever dream on a lonely hill? But the cloth is real. The tears in the fabric are real, and so is the price he's already paying. Egypt receives him as it receives all of Solomon's enemies, with careful hospitality and cautious distance. Pharaoh Shishak grants him asylum, a place in the court, enough to survive, but not enough to matter. Jeroboam becomes another exile, another displaced man haunting the edges of someone else's kingdom, waiting for a future that might never come. 7 years pass like water through a broken vessel. Jeroboam learns Egyptian, wears Egyptian clothes, eats Egyptian food. He watches Pharaoh's court, studies how power works, how kingdoms are built and maintained. He marries an Egyptian woman, tries to build something resembling a life, but every night he takes out the 10 pieces of cloth, now faded, edges fraying, and holds them in the darkness. Some nights he prays, some nights he can't. The words tangle in his throat, caught between faith and accusation. But you said I'd be king, he whispers to the ceiling of his borrowed room. I'm a refugee. You said you'd build me a dynasty. I have nothing, not even my own land. The cloth pieces slip through his fingers. In the lamplight, they look less like a promise and more like remnants of something that died on that hill 7 years ago. But on certain nights, when the homesickness becomes a physical ache, he remembers the rest of Ahijah's words, the condition woven into the promise. If you walk in obedience to me, if you do what is right in my eyes, if you keep my decrees and commands as David did. He thinks about David, the shepherd king, the man after God's own heart. David, who waited years for his anointing to come true, who hid in caves and ran from Saul, who had every chance to seize the throne by force and refused. David, who trusted that what God promised, God would accomplish. David, who kept the covenant even when the covenant seemed to have forgotten him. Jeroboam closes his eyes and tries to be that man. Some nights he almost believes he can be. Then comes a night that changes everything. A messenger bursts into the Egyptian court, dusty from hard travel, carrying news that spreads through the palace like wildfire. Solomon is dead. The great king, the wise king, the king whose reign seemed eternal, dead. His son Rehoboam sits on the throne now, young and untested, surrounded by advisors who don't remember what it costs to build a kingdom. Jeroboam stands in the Egyptian courtyard, the news washing over him like a wave. His hands begin to shake. 7 years of waiting, 7 years of exile, 7 years of wondering if the prophecy was real. And now, suddenly, impossibly, the door stands open. He goes to his room and pulls out the cloth pieces one last time. In the lamplight, they don't look faded anymore. They look like what they always were. A promise, a calling, a door swinging open on rusty hinges. He holds them against his chest and feels his heart hammering beneath them. But there's something else stirring in his chest now. Something that wasn't there on the hill 7 years ago. Fear. Not the fear of Solomon's guards or the fear of dying in the desert. A different kind of fear. The fear of getting what you've been promised and discovering you can't hold it. The fear that the kingdom will be given to you and then slip through your fingers. The fear that drives men to secure what God has given, to build walls around grace, to ensure by human effort what was offered as divine gift. Jeroboam packs his belongings. He says goodbye to his Egyptian wife, his borrowed life, his 7 years of safety. As he prepares to leave, one of Pharaoh's advisors pulls him aside. You're going back to claim a kingdom, the Egyptian says. Remember, kingdoms aren't kept by prophecy alone. They're kept by power, by strategy, by making sure no one can take from you what you've won. It's practical advice, wise even, the kind of counsel that keeps kingdoms stable and kings secure. Jeroboam nods, tucks the cloth pieces into his traveling pack, and begins the journey home. He walks north through the desert he once fled across, his shadow stretching long in the sand. Behind him, Egypt fades into heat shimmer. Ahead, Israel waits, unsettled, divided, ready for someone to lead them. He doesn't know yet that the Egyptian's advice has already planted a seed. He doesn't know yet that security and faith are not the same thing. He doesn't know yet that you can receive everything from God's hand and still lose it all by trying to keep it. But the clay jar of his future is already forming on the potter's wheel, and the first crack has appeared, invisible, right at the center where promise and fear will soon collide. The desert wind picks up, erasing his footprints as fast as he makes them. Above, the sun burns. Ahead, the kingdom waits. And in his pack, 10 pieces of torn cloth rest against his extra tunic, still carrying the weight of a covenant whose condition he's already beginning to forget. If you walk in obedience to me, the words echo in the wind. But Jeroboam is already thinking about strategy. Shechem erupts with the sound of thousands. The ancient city where Joshua once gathered the tribes and called them to choose whom they would serve, now fills again with voices, angry, hopeful, desperate. The northern tribes have assembled, summoned by their elders, united by one grievance. Solomon's son Rehoboam has inherited the throne, but he has not yet earned their loyalty. Jeroboam arrives to find a powder keg waiting for a spark. Men press close as he walks through the crowd, recognizing him. You're the one Ahijah spoke over, the one Solomon feared, the one who survived Egypt. Their eyes burn with expectation. They don't want another Solomon. They want someone who remembers what it feels like to carry stones until your back breaks. The tribal elders meet him in a tent before the great assembly. These are hard men, weathered by decades of Solomon's taxation and forced labor. The eldest Ahimaaz of Ephraim studies Jeroboam carefully. The people are ready to break from Rehoboam, he says bluntly. But they need to know you're strong enough to lead the break. They need to know you won't bend the moment. Jeruso applies pressure. Jeroboam meets his gaze. 7 years in Egypt taught him how to read power. I didn't run from Solomon because I was weak, he says quietly. I ran because I wasn't ready. I'm ready now. Ahimaaz nods slowly. And come, let's see if the people agree. The assembly at Shechem becomes the hinge on which history turns. Rehoboam arrives with his retinue, young and arrogant, surrounded by advisors who've never felt a whip. The people's spokesman steps forward, a Levite named Adoram, and delivers the question everyone's been waiting to ask. Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. It's a reasonable request, a generous offer. Serve us justly, and we'll serve you faithfully. Rehoboam withdraws to consult his advisors. The older counselors, men who served Solomon, urge gentleness. If today you will be a servant to these people, and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. It's wisdom, born of experience. Kingdoms are held together by loyalty more than force. But Rehoboam rejects their counsel. Instead, he listens to the young men he grew up with, the ones who've never known anything but privilege. They urge strength, dominance, demonstration of power. Tell them this, they say, grinning. Make them fear you from the start. 3 days later, Rehoboam returns to the assembly. His answer rings across Shechem like a slap. My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with scorpions. Silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the crowd erupts. What share do we have in David? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, David. The northern tribes explode in rebellion, and Rehoboam flees back to Jerusalem, barely escaping with his life. In the chaos, the elders turn to Jeroboam. Their faces are hard with decision. Will you lead us? This is the moment. The torn cloth, the prophecy, the 7 years of waiting. All of it has been driving toward this single question. Jeroboam looks at the sea of faces, thousands of them, looking to him for something Solomon's line can't give them. He thinks of Ahijah's words, I will give you 10 tribes. He doesn't hesitate. I will lead you. The roar that follows shakes the city walls. They bring the crown, hastily made, not yet the polished symbol of generations, but real enough. They place it on Jeroboam's head, and with that single act, the kingdom of Solomon splits in two. Israel in the north, Judah in the south, the prophecy fulfilled, the impossible made real. That night Jeroboam sits alone in the chamber they've given him, his first night as king. The crown rests on a table beside him, heavy and strange. You should feel triumphant. You should feel vindicated. Instead, he feels the weight of what he's just taken on. 10 tribes, millions of people, a kingdom born in rebellion, held together by grievance and hope. He pulls out the 10 pieces of cloth, now worn thin from 7 years of handling. He spreads them on the table beside the crown. Promise and fulfillment, side by side. God kept his word. The torn cloak became a torn kingdom, and Jeroboam stands at the center of it. He closes his eyes and tries to pray, tries to find words adequate for this moment. "You did it," he whispers. "Just like you said, Nikki, I'll be faithful. I'll remember." Enoch interrupts him. His advisors enter without waiting for permission. Their face is urgent. Maps unfurl across the table, covering the cloth pieces. Scrolls stack up, reports from scouts, assessments of resources. The work of kingship begins before the crown is even warm. "We need to discuss security," says Adoram. Now his chief counselor Rehoboam won't accept this division. "He'll come with an army. Let him come," another advisor growls. "And do we have the numbers?" "Numbers aren't enough," a third interjects. "We need fortifications, alliances, a strategy." Jeroboam raises his hand for silence. They fall quiet, watching their new king. He studies the maps, the troop reports, the logistics of defending a kingdom still forming. His mind, sharpened by 7 years of watching Egyptian strategy, begins to work. "Fortify the border cities," he says. "Send envoys to the tribal leaders. Make sure everyone knows we're not going back." The advisors nod, impressed. They begin discussing details, implementation, timelines. Jeroboam contributes where needed, his voice steady, his decisions sound. He's good at this. The realization surprises him. He's actually good at being king. But then, one advisor mentions something that makes Jeroboam's blood run cold. Of course, the people will want to go to Jerusalem for the festivals. The temple is there, and the feasts of the Lord. The room falls silent. Everyone realizes it at once. The problem isn't armies or borders or resources. The problem is worship. 3 times a year, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles. Every Israelite male is required to appear before the Lord at the place he has chosen for generations. That place was the tabernacle. Now it's the temple. Solomon's temple in Jerusalem in Rehoboam's territory. Jeroboam feels ice spreading through his chest. He stares at the map, seeing it clearly now. Every festival, thousands of his people will travel south. They'll pass through Judah's cities. They'll worship in David's city. They'll see the temples of glory, remember the dynasty's legacy. They'll stand in the courts where David's descendant reigns, and slowly, inevitably, their hearts will turn back. If these people go up to offer sacrifices at the temple of the Lord in Jerusalem, he says slowly, thinking it through aloud, their hearts will turn again to their Lord Rehoboam, king of Judah. They will kill me and return to King Rehoboam. The advisors exchange glances. No one contradicts him. They've all thought the same thing. It's the fatal flaw in the new kingdom. Political independence undermined by religious unity. How do you rule a people whose God commands them to worship in your rival's capital? Adoram speaks carefully. Perhaps we could build our own worship centers. Places for the people to bring their sacrifices without the journey to Jerusalem. It's a simple suggestion, a practical solution, a way to keep the kingdom secure. Jeroboam's mind realizes other nations have multiple temples. Egypt has shrines throughout the land. Even Israel had the tabernacle in different locations before Solomon built the temple. It's not unprecedented. It's strategic. It's necessary. But somewhere deep beneath the logic, beneath the strategy, beneath the legitimate concern for his kingdom's security, a small voice whispers, "This isn't what God commanded. The place of worship isn't yours to decide." Jeroboam pushes the voice away. "Bring me the craftsmen," he says, "the finest metal workers, the ones who know how to work with gold, and find me maps of the kingdom. I need to know the best locations." The advisors scatter to obey, energized by their king's decisiveness. Within minutes, Jeroboam is alone again, with maps and scrolls and the machinery of kingship. The crown sits beside him. The 10 pieces of cloth lie buried beneath a pile of reports. He traces 2 locations on the map: Bethel in the south, near the border with Judah, and Dan in the far north. Perfect boundaries, perfect symbols, worship centers that say to the people, you don't need Jerusalem anymore. You don't need David's lie. Everything you need is here, in your own kingdom, under your own king. It makes sense. It's wise. It's exactly what a smart king would do to secure what God has given him. He doesn't realize yet that he's about to commit the sin that will define his legacy. He doesn't realize yet that there's a difference between securing what God gives and replacing God's commands with your own design. He doesn't realize yet that the condition woven into the prophecy, if you walk in obedience to me, if you do what is right in my eyes, is about to shatter under the weight of his fear. Outside, night deepens over Shechem. The people celebrate their new king, their liberation from Solomon's oppression, their hope for something better. Inside, Jeroboam leans over the maps and makes the decision that will destroy everything he's just received. The first crack in the vessel has widened into a fracture, and Jeroboam, eyes fixed on security, doesn't see it yet, but God does. The craftsmen work in secret, behind closed doors in a guarded workshop. The sound of hammers on gold echoes through rooms where only the most trusted are permitted. Jeroboam visits often, watching as the statues take shape. 2 golden calves, each one magnificent, each one calculated to walk the razor's edge between symbol and sacrilege. He's thought this through carefully. The calf isn't an arbitrary choice. It's strategic, layered with meaning his people will recognize. In Egypt, where he spent 7 years, the Apis bull represented strength and fertility, divine power in tangible form. But more importantly, the people of Israel themselves have history with this image. At Sinai, when Moses delayed on the mountain, Aaron fashioned a golden calf and declared, "These are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." It was rebellion then, yes, but it was also an attempt to make the invisible God visible, to give the people something they could see and touch. That's what Jeroboam tells himself as he watches the gold pour into the molds. He's not replacing God. He's not introducing foreign deities. He's simply giving the people a symbol, a focal point, a way to worship the God of Israel without the dangerous journey to Jerusalem. The calves will represent the Lord's strength, the power that brought them out of bondage. There'll be pedestals for the invisible presence, platforms for the glory of the God who delivered their fathers. It's a thin justification. And somewhere in the unguarded moments of night, Jeroboam knows it. But fear is a master craftsman, and it shapes his reasoning like gold in the fire. The unveiling at Bethel comes first. The city swarms with people summoned for the occasion: tribal leaders, priests, common workers, families. The air thrums with anticipation. What has their new king created? What will worship look like in this new kingdom? Jeroboam stands before the covered statues, his heart pounding. He's rehearsed this moment, chosen every word carefully. The covers drop, and there they stand. 2 golden calves gleaming in the sunlight, magnificent and terrible. The crowd gasps. Some faces show awe, drawn by the beauty and the boldness. Others register confusion, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. A few, mostly older Levites, men who remember the stories, go pale with horror. Jeroboam raises his hands, his voice carrying across the assembly. "Behold, O Israel, here is your God who brought you up from the land of Egypt. It is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. These are convenient centers where you can worship the Lord without the burden of travel, without the danger of passing through Judah's territory, without bowing to Rehoboam's demands." He's careful not to say these are gods, plural. He frames it as convenience, as practicality, as liberation from an unnecessary burden. But the words he chooses here, "is your God," echo across generations, carrying the stain of Aaron's sin at Sinai. Some in the crowd cheer. They see what Jeroboam wants him to see: freedom from Jerusalem's control, worship on their own terms, a king who understands their needs. Others remain silent, their faces troubled. And a small group in the back, led by a young Levite named Iddu, turns and walks away, their departure a silent condemnation. One voice rises above the murmurs, an old priest, his beard white, his hand shaking with fury. This is blasphemy. The Lord chose Jerusalem. He chose David's line. He cannot simply move forward. Jeroboam raises a hand to stop them, but his face is hardened. I am the king, God appointed, he says, voice cold. The same God who tore the kingdom from Solomon's house and gave it to me. Do you question the Lord's choice? The old priest's mouth works, but no words come. The logic is a trap. If God chose Jeroboam as king, who are they to question the king's decisions about worship? The priest stumbles away, shoulders bent, defeated by rhetoric. The second calf is erected at Dan with less ceremony, but the same result: division, confusion, and the slow poison of compromise spreading through the kingdom. Jeroboam appoints priests from all the tribes, not just Levites, breaking the ancient order. He institutes festivals on dates of his own choosing, mirroring Jerusalem's calendar, but different enough to establish independence. He builds altars, shrines, high places throughout the land. Everything is calculated. Everything is strategic. Everything is designed to keep the kingdom secure and the people loyal. And it works. The people stop traveling to Jerusalem. They bring their sacrifices to Bethel and Dan. They accept the new priests, the new festivals, the new order. Jeroboam's kingdom stabilizes. His rule strengthens. By every political measure, his strategy succeeds. But late at night, alone in his chamber, Jeroboam finds prayer increasingly difficult. He still goes through the motions, still bows, still mouths the words, but they stick in his throat like ash. When he tries to recall the moment on the hill with Ahijah, the memory feels distant, as if it happened to someone else. The 10 pieces of torn cloth remain in a cedar box, but he hasn't looked at them in months. They become an artifact of a simpler time, before he understood what kingship truly requires. He tells himself he's being practical. He tells himself God understands. He tells himself that securing the kingdom God gave him is its own form of obedience. He tells himself that intention matters more than method, that the heart of worship matters more than the location. But the words ring hollow even in his own mind. One evening a scroll arrives, sealed with wax, delivered by a messenger who refuses to say who sent it. Jeroboam breaks the seal and reads words that feel like ice in his veins. Thus says the remnant of the faithful priests, you have made Israel to sin. You have caused the people to bow before images and forsake the commandments. You have led them away from the path of their fathers. The Lord will not hold you guiltless. The kingdom built on disobedience cannot stand. Jeroboam's hands tremble as he holds the parchment. For a moment, just a moment, he sees himself clearly. He sees a man who received everything from God's hand and immediately began rebuilding it according to his own design. He sees the golden calves not as strategic symbols, but as monuments to his own fear, his own need to control what God had freely given. The moment passes, his jaw sets. He crumples the scroll and throws it into the fire. They don't understand, he mutters. They don't see what I see. They don't carry the weight I carry. They can afford to be pure. I have to keep a kingdom together. The scroll burns, curling into ash. Jeroboam watches as the flames and feels something hardened in his chest, the final calcification of compromise into conviction. He's gone too far to turn back now. Too much is invested. Too many people depend on the system he's created. An emitting error would destabilize everything he's built. So instead of repenting, he reinforces. Instead of reconsidering, he doubles down. He appoints more non-Levitical priests. He builds more shrines. He makes the calendar of festivals more elaborate, more spectacular, more impossible to abandon. If he's going to do this, he'll do it completely. If he's going to compete with Jerusalem, he'll make Bethel irresistible. The kingdom thrives. The treasury fills. The people seem content. By every earthly measure, Jeroboam is succeeding. But in the night, in the silence he can't fill with strategy or noise, a question haunts him. What did Ahijah say? If you walk in obedience to me and do what is right in my eyes, if you keep my decrees and commands, as David did, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as the one I built for David. If the word echoes in the darkness, if Jeroboam pulls the covers tighter and tells himself he's still walking in obedience, he's still serving God, just differently, practically, appropriately for the situation. God will understand. God has to understand. But in his heart, beneath all the justifications, he knows the truth. He's not securing what God gave him, he's replacing it. And the condition that came with the promise, the single, absolute condition, has been shattered. Outside his window, the golden calf at Bethel gleams in the moonlight, beautiful and blasphemous, a monument to the moment when fear became faith, and a kingdom began to die from the inside. Jeroboam closes his eyes, but sleep doesn't come. It won't come easily again for the rest of his life. Because somewhere in the darkness, in the space between what was promised and what he's built, something is beginning to break. And breaking, once it starts, rarely stops until everything is shattered. The great feast at Bethel blazes with celebration. Torches line the streets, with smoke from sacrifices rises thick and sweet, and thousands pack the city to witness King Jeroboam's festival, his own appointed time, his own calendar, his own order. It's the 15th day of the 8th month, exactly 1 month after Judah's festival of tabernacles. Different enough to declare independence, similar enough to feel legitimate, Jeroboam has planned every detail. The priests he appointed, men from every tribe loyal to him, grateful for their elevation, move through the rituals with practiced precision. The altars overflow with offerings. The people sing, dance, eat the sacrificial meals. Everything is working exactly as designed. His kingdom has its own worship, its own rhythm, its own identity separate from Jerusalem. But Jeroboam wants more than successful logistics. He wants to demonstrate that his authority extends beyond politics into the sacred. He wants to prove that he doesn't need the Levites, doesn't need Jerusalem's priesthood, doesn't need the old order. So, he does what no king of Israel has ever done, what even David, the man after God's own heart, never presumed to do. He ascends the altar himself to burn incense. The crowd falls silent as their king climbs the steps, dressed in royal robes, carrying the censer. Some faces show pride. Look at our king, not just a ruler, but a priest mediating between us and heaven. Others show confusion. Is this allowed? Can he do this? A few of the older people, the ones who remember the stories of Uzziah and Korah, feel ice in their veins. Jeroboam reaches the top of the altar. The smoke swirls around him. He raises the censer high, his face set with determination, and prepares to offer incense to complete the act that will cement his control over every aspect of his kingdom's life. Then a voice cuts through the celebration like a blade through silk. Every head turns. The music stops. The dancing freezes. There, standing at the edge of the gathering, is a man no one recognizes. He's dressed simply, his face weathered, his eyes burning with the same terrible light Jeroboam once saw in Ahijah's gaze. A prophet from Judah, by the look of his clothes, alone, unarmed, and absolutely fearless. The man points directly at the altar, directly at Jeroboam, and his voice carries with supernatural clarity across the stunned crowd. Thus says the Lord, a son named Josiah will be born to the house of David, and on you he will sacrifice the priests of the high places who make offerings here, and human bones will be burned on you. The words land like physical blows. Josiah is a specific name, the house of David, sacrificing Jeroboam's priests on this very altar. It's not a vague warning or a conditional prophecy. It's a declaration of certain judgment, detailed and devastating. Jeroboam's face flushes red. Every eye is on him. His priests are frozen mid-ritual. The crowd holds its breath. Everything he's built, everything he's established, stands on the edge of collapse if he lets this man speak unchallenged. Seize him, Jeroboam roars, his voice cracking with fury and fear. He stretches out his hand from the altar, pointing at the prophet, commanding his guards to take the man who dares speak against his kingdom, his authority, his very altar, and his hand withers. It happens instantly. The arm extended in command suddenly shrivels, the flesh shrinking, the fingers curling into useless claws. The hand that pointed in authority becomes dead weight, paralyzed, useless. Pain shoots through Jeroboam's arm. He cries out, staggering on the altar steps, cradling the withered limb against his chest. The crowd gasps, recoils, presses backward. Some scream. Mothers grab their children. Strong men go pale. The guards freeze, trapped between their king's command and the terror of what they've just witnessed. And then the altar itself splits. A crack runs down the center of the structure with a sound like thunder. Ashes pour out, spilling across the ground, covering the steps where Jeroboam stands. The sign the prophet promised, immediate, undeniable, impossible to explain away. The altar Jeroboam built, the center of his religious revolution, broken open before thousands of witnesses. Jeroboam looks down at his withered hand, then at the split altar, then at the prophet still standing calm and unmoved. Every justification he's constructed, every rationalization he's made, crumbles like the broken altar. This isn't political opposition. This isn't rivalry between kingdoms. This is God himself declaring judgment. Please. The word tears from Jeroboam's throat. All pride stripped away, all pretense shattered. He's no longer a king commanding. He's a man begging. Plead with the Lord your God for me. Pray that my hand may be restored. The prophet doesn't gloat, doesn't condemn, doesn't preach. He simply prays. And as he prays, the hand that withered in defiance is restored. Flesh returning, fingers straightening, strength flowing back. Jeroboam stares at his healed hand, flexing the fingers, feeling life return where death had seized it. He should be grateful. He should be broken. He should fall to his knees right there on the broken altar and repent before God and the thousands watching. This is the moment, the clear, undeniable intervention that demands response. But instead, Jeroboam does what he's done since the golden calves were made. He tries to manage the situation. "Come home with me and have something to eat," he says to the prophet, his voice shaking, but attempting hospitality, attempting normalcy. "Let me give you a gift." It's an attempt to co-opt the prophet, to turn judgment into relationship, to blur the lines between God's messenger and the king's guest. If he can make this man his ally, or at least his debtor, maybe the message can be softened, maybe the prophecy can be negotiated. The prophet's response is immediate and absolute. "Even if you were to give me half your possessions, I would not go with you, nor would I eat bread or drink water here. For I was commanded by the word of the Lord, you must not eat bread or drink water or return by the way you came." And with that, the prophet turns and walks away through the silent crowd, past the guards who make no move to stop him, leaving behind a split altar, a shaken king, and thousands of witnesses who've just seen heaven break through the carefully constructed illusion. Jeroboam stands frozen on the altar steps, his restored hand still trembling, ashes coating his royal robes. The celebration is over. The feast has become a funeral. Around him, his priests don't know whether to continue the rituals or abandon them. The people begin to disperse, whispering, their faces troubled. Everything Jeroboam built to create security has just been exposed as rebellion. Everything he justified as necessary has just been condemned as sin. The warning is clear. The sign is undeniable. The path forward is obvious. Repent. Tear down the altars. Return to God's commands. Trust that the God who gave you the kingdom can keep it without your golden calves. But as Jeroboam descends from the broken altar, as servants rush to clean the ash from his robes, as advisors surround him with concerned questions, something hardens in his chest. Instead of breaking, he's in too deep. He's built too much. He's committed too publicly. To admit error now would be to admit that everything, the calves, the priests, the festivals, the entire religious structure of his kingdom, was wrong from the start. It would destabilize everything. It would vindicate Jerusalem. It would prove that he couldn't be trusted with what God gave him. So, instead of repenting, he rationalizes, the prophet was probably sent by Rehoboam to undermine him. The altar splitting could have been a natural crack, dramatic timing, but not necessarily supernatural. His hand withering and healing. Well, that's harder to explain. But maybe it was temporary paralysis from stress, psychosomatic, not really a miracle. People see what they want to see. That night in his chamber, Jeroboam looks at his hand, fully restored, no sign of the withering. He flexes it, makes a fist, tells himself he's fine. Everything is fine. The kingdom is stable. The people are loyal. One prophet, one dramatic moment doesn't negate everything he's accomplished. He doesn't take out the 10 pieces of torn cloth. He doesn't read the words of the faithful priest's scroll. He doesn't pray. Instead, he calls his advisors and begins planning how to counter the day's events. New festivals, more spectacular rituals, better priests, bigger sacrifices. If doubt has crept in, he'll overwhelm it with spectacle. If the people are shaken, he'll give them something so magnificent they'll forget the split altar. Outside his window, the broken altar at Bethel stands in moonlight, cracked down the center, ash staining the ground. A monument to the moment when God spoke clearly and the king chose not to listen. The golden calf beside it gleams, untouched, still beautiful, still blasphemous. Jeroboam looks at it and tells himself he made the right choice. He has to believe that. The alternative, that he's destroying everything God gave him, is too terrible to face, so he doesn't face it. He reinforces the walls of his own delusion and calls it faith. He hardens his heart and calls it strength. He ignores the warning and calls it moving forward, but in the silence between his heartbeats. In the space where truth lives beyond justification, the verdict has already been pronounced. The altar is split. The prophecy is spoken. The judgment is set. Jeroboam just doesn't know it yet. Or perhaps he does, and that's why he can't sleep. That's why his hand sometimes trembles for no reason. That's why, in unguarded moments, he catches himself staring at the golden calves with something that looks less like pride and more like horror. The kingdom stands. The people worship at Bethel and Dan. Life continues. But something is fundamentally broken, and all the gold in Israel can't repair it. Years pass like water through cracked stone, slowly eroding what was never as solid as it seemed. Jeroboam's kingdom endures, but it doesn't thrive. The worship at Bethel and Dan continues, but it feels hollow, mechanical, a system maintained by momentum rather than conviction. The priests Jeroboam appointed grow fat and corrupt, their hands stained with bribes, their mouths full of empty blessings. The high places multiply like weeds across the hillsides, crude altars where anything can be called worship, where every man does what seems right in his own eyes. Moral chaos spreads through the northern tribes as the boundaries between sacred and profane blur beyond recognition. Theft increases, violence becomes commonplace. The justice system, once rooted in the Torah's clear commands, becomes a marketplace where verdicts are sold to the highest bidder. Families fracture. Neighbors turn against each other. The social fabric that held Israel together for generations begins to tear. Jeroboam sees it all, but refuses to acknowledge the connection. When crime increases, he blames poor enforcement and appoints more judges. When prophets speak against the corruption, he calls them political agitators funded by Jerusalem. When merchants complain about dishonest weights and measures, he issues regulations that no one follows. When the faithful remnant, those who still remember what true worship looked like, who still teach their children the real commandments, quietly disappear south to Jerusalem, he tells himself they're traitors, not refugees fleeing spiritual disaster. He holds council meetings where advisors present solutions to problems they never name directly. Their people are restless. Moral standards are declining. Religious observance feels perfunctory. They dance around the obvious cause, and Jeroboam lets them because naming it would require facing it. His sons grow up in this atmosphere, princes raised in a palace where worship is policy and God is a tool of statecraft. The oldest, Nadab, is cruel and entitled, beating servants for minor infractions, mocking the priests his father appointed, already surrounding himself with violent men who will help him seize power when the time comes. The second son is brutal in a different way, calculating, cold, already plotting against his brother. But the third son, Abijah, is different, quieter, thoughtful. He has his mother's gentle eyes and something else something that makes servants love him, that makes even hardened guards soften when he passes. Sometimes Jeroboam catches the boy reading the old texts, the Torah scrolls kept in the palace library but rarely consulted. The scrolls gather dust except when Obadiah pulls them down, sits cross-legged on the floor, and reads by lamplight. Once Jeroboam found him in the library late at night. "What are you reading?" he asked. Obadiah looked up, unafraid. "Deuteronomy, the blessings and curses. Father, why don't we worship the way Moses commanded? Why don't we go to Jerusalem for the feasts?" Jeroboam felt something twist in his chest. "It's complicated, son. Politics, security. You'll understand when you're older. But God's commands aren't complicated," Obadiah said simply. "They're just hard." The boy didn't mean it as criticism. He was genuinely confused, genuinely seeking to understand. But his words landed like arrows. Jeroboam left the library without answering, and he avoided Obadiah for days afterward. Sometimes he hears Obadiah praying, not the ritualized prayers of the state's religion, the mechanical recitations offered at Bethel, but real prayers, the kind Jeroboam himself once offered on a lonely hill before everything became complicated. The boy prays for the kingdom, for his brothers, even for his father. "Help him see," Obadiah whispers in the darkness. Not knowing, Jeroboam stands outside his chamber. Help him remember who he was before he was afraid. It troubles Jeroboam deeply. It also gives him a fragile, desperate hope. Maybe something good can survive what he's built. Maybe one son can be different. Maybe there's a thread of faithfulness that can pass through the ruin of his reign and emerge clean on the other side. Then Obadiah falls ill. It starts with a fever. Nothing alarming at first. The kind of sickness children get and recover from after a few days of rest. Obadiah wakes one morning with flushed cheeks and a headache. The palace physician examines him, prescribes willow bark tea and cool compresses, assures everyone the boy will be fine by week's end, but this fever doesn't break. Days pass, and instead of improving, Obadiah grows weaker. The flush deepens. His skin burns to the touch. He begins to have trouble keeping food down. The physician's confident assurances become worried consultations. More physicians arrive, each with different theories, bad humors, tainted water, a curse from enemies. They bleed him, which only makes him weaker. They apply poultices that do nothing. They argue in hallways while inside the chamber, a boy slowly fades. By the end of the first week, Obadiah is bedridden, his young body racked with fever that makes him shake and sweat and cry out in his sleep. His mother sits beside him day and night, bathing his forehead with cool water, trying to get him to drink, singing the old songs their people sang in Egypt before the Exodus. Sometimes he recognizes her. Sometimes he stares through her at something she can't see. The palace erupts into controlled chaos. Servants rush through corridors with fresh linens and medicinal herbs. Physicians come and go at all hours, their faces increasingly grave. Jeroboam orders sacrifices at Bethel, bulls and rams, grain offerings and incense, everything the priests recommend. The smoke rises thick from the golden calves, but the boy doesn't improve. The priests offer reassurances that ring hollow. The gods are testing your faith. The sacrifice needs to be larger. Perhaps if you built another altar, dedicate another high place. Their suggestions always require more offerings, more building projects, more displays of devotion to the system Jeroboam created, but none of it helps. The smoke rises and disperses and changes nothing. Jeroboam's other sons watch with calculating eyes. Nadab barely hides his satisfaction. One less rival for the throne. He starts speaking more boldly in council, making suggestions, positioning himself as the strong heir the kingdom needs. The other brothers circle like vultures, already measuring the space Abijah's death might create, already forming alliances and making promises about what will happen when they're in power. When the Jeroboam truly grieves, he dismisses the advisors, postpones the councils, spends hours sitting beside his son's bed. He watches the boy's chest rise and fall with increasing difficulty. Each breath a labor, each exhale a small surrender. He holds the small, fevered hand in his own, the hand that was once withered and restored. now strong but useless to heal the dying child before him. Obijah, in his lucid moments, doesn't complain. He apologizes for being sick, for causing trouble, for worrying everyone. "I'm sorry, Father," he whispers through cracked lips. "I know you're busy. I know the kingdom needs you. I'll try to get better quickly." The words break something in Jeroboam. "Don't apologize," he says, his voice rough. "Just rest. Just get better." But Abijah doesn't get better. 10 days pass, then 12, then 14. The boy grows gaunt, his eyes sinking into his skull, his skin papery and gray. He drifts in and out of consciousness, sometimes crying out in delirium, sometimes lying terrifyingly still. The physicians stop offering hope and start suggesting Jeroboam should prepare himself. For the first time in years, real fear pierces through Jeroboam's carefully constructed defenses. Not political fear, not strategic concern. The raw, primal terror of a father watching his child slip away, powerless to stop it. All his authority, all his wealth, all his careful planning, none of it matters. His son is dying, and there's nothing he can do. He tries to pray. Late at night, alone in his chamber after another long watch at Obijah's bedside, he kneels and tries to find words, but the prayers stick in his throat like stones. How long has it been since he really prayed? Since he approached God as anything other than a political entity to be managed? The words that once came naturally now feel foreign, impossible to speak. The golden calves flash in his mind, monuments to the moment he replaced trust with control. The split altar, the prophet's words echoing across years. A son named Josiah will be born to the house of David, and on you he will sacrifice the priests who make offerings here. The withered hand restored as a warning he ignored, and suddenly the connection he's denied becomes impossible to ignore. This is judgment. Not abstract, not theoretical, not something that happens to other people in other times. This is his son dying. His good son, the only pure thing left in his house, and somewhere in the depths of his soul, in the place where truth lives beyond all justification, Jeroboam knows why. He staggers to his feet, paces the chamber like a caged animal. "No!" he says, aloud to the empty room. "No, it can't be that. It's just sickness. Children get sick. It happens. It's not," but he can't finish the lie. Even alone, even to himself, he can't maintain the pretense anymore. He sinks onto his bed, head in his hands, and lets reality touch him for the first time since he built the calves. "I did this," he whispers into the darkness. "I chose wrong. I knew it was wrong at the time, felt it in my bones, and I did it anyway. I held your kingdom in my hands, and instead of trusting you to keep it, I rebuilt it in my image. I replaced your altar with mine, your priests with mine, your commands with mine. And now my son, my good son, the only one who might have been different, the only one who still prays real prayers and reads your words, he's dying because of what I chose." The admission costs him everything. A tear falls, the first in years, then another. His shoulders shake with silent sobs. The king who controlled everything can't control this. The man who managed every threat through strategy and force sits helpless before the consequence of his own rebellion. All the walls he built, all the justifications he crafted, all the careful reasoning that let him sleep at night, it all crumbles, leaving him naked before truth. He cries until he's empty. Then he sits in the silence, hollow and broken, staring at nothing. Outside, the palace sleeps. The kingdom continues its hollow rituals. The golden calves stand unmoved, but in this chamber a man has finally stopped running from what he's known all along. In the suffocating silence of his grief, a thought surfaces: Ahijah, the prophet who first gave him the kingdom, who spoke God's promise on that hill so many years ago. The prophet who saw everything before it happened, whose words always came true. If anyone knows whether there's hope, whether there's a chance, whether God might still hear him, it's Ahijah. The thought brings a flicker of something, not quite hope, but not complete despair either. Maybe the prophet will have an answer. Maybe there's a sacrifice he can offer, a thing he can do, a way to fix this. Maybe it's not too late. But even as the thought forms, Jeroboam knows he can't go himself. The king who defied God's commands can't face God's prophet. The shame is too deep, the gap too wide. How does he look Ahijah in the eye after everything? How does he stand before the man who gave him 10 torn pieces of cloth and a conditional promise, when he's broken every condition and torn the covenant beyond recognition? The cowardice tastes bitter, but it's real. He can't do it. He can't face what Ahijah will say, can't bear to see his own failure reflected in the prophet's eyes. So he makes a decision born of desperation and shame in equal measure. He waits until just before dawn, then goes to his wife's chamber. She's already awake, sitting beside a window, staring out at the darkness. She doesn't look at him when he enters. They've barely spoken in days, both keeping vigil over Abijah in shifts, passing each other in corridors with exhausted nods, too drained for words. Her face is hollowed by sleeplessness and grief, her eyes red-rimmed, her hands trembling slightly in her lap. When Jeroboam closes the door, she finally looks at him, and her gaze holds an accusation she's too tired to voice. She knows. Wives always know. She's watched him build the calves, watched him harden his heart, watched him ignore every warning. She's known for years where this path led, even if she couldn't stop it. "There's a prophet in Shiloh," Jeroboam says quietly, his voice rough from crying. "Ahijah, the one who first told me I would be king. He's old now, nearly blind, they say, but he still hears from God. I need you to go to him. Ask him about our son. Ask him if his voice breaks. Ask him if there's any hope." She stares at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then quietly, "You want me to go to a prophet? You who built altars to replace the prophets. You who silenced everyone who spoke God's word against your golden calves. You want me to ask if there's hope?" I know the words come out broken, barely audible. I know what I've done, but he might still answer. He might still, "Why don't you go yourself?" The question hangs between them like a blade. They both know the answer. Because Jeroboam is afraid. Because he can't face what Ahijah will say. Because he's spent years building walls against truth, and those walls can't come down now, not even for his dying son, because he's a coward wrapped in a king's robes. He doesn't answer, can't answer, just stands there, exposed, asking his wife to do what he's too broken to do himself. She looks at him for a long time, this woman who married a refugee and became a queen, who watched her husband receive a kingdom from God, and then slowly destroy it through fear. She's seen every compromise, every justification, every moment he chose control over trust. She's watched the man she married disappear behind the machinery of survival, leaving only a hollow king going through motions. Something in her face hardens with decision. She stands, moves past him without touching, and begins gathering supplies. Not for him. She's made that clear. For Abijah, for the son who deserves better than the legacy his father is leaving. For the boy who still prays with an honest heart in a house built on lies. Al-Goshe says, her back to him. But not for you, for him, for our son, who's better than both of us. She prepares in the darkness before dawn. Simple clothes, worn and patched, nothing that marks her as royalty. She removes her jewelry, washes the cosmetics from her face, braids her hair in the style of common women. She takes food for the journey, a small bag of silver in case the prophet needs convincing, though they both know silver means nothing to a true prophet. She moves with purpose, with a kind of grim determination. As she's about to leave, she stops at Abijah's chamber one more time. Jeroboam follows, standing in the doorway while she approaches the bed. The boy is still breathing, but barely. His chest rises and falls in shallow, rapid movements. His lips are cracked and bleeding. His fevered hand clutches the blanket. She bends close, strokes his burning forehead with infinite gentleness, and whispers, "I'm going to get help. My love, I'm bringing answers." Abijah's eyes flutter open, fever bright, but somehow clear, focused. He looks at his mother with such love, such trust, that she has to bite her lip to keep from breaking down. "Mother?" he whispers, his voice barely audible. "Am I dying?" She can't lie to him. This boy who always told truth deserves truth in return. "I don't know," she says, tears finally spilling. I'm going to find out. I'm going to ask someone who can tell me. Obijah's gaze shifts past her to Jeroboam in the doorway. For a moment, father and son look at each other across the distance of all that's unsaid. Then Obijah whispers, "Tell him I'm not afraid. Tell him it's not his fault. Tell him I love him, but it is his fault, and they all know it." The boy is too kind to say it, too good to add to his father's burden. That's why he's the only good thing left in Jeroboam's house. That's why his death will be mercy. She kisses his forehead, holds his hand one more moment, then forces herself to leave before she loses her resolve. She brushes past Jeroboam without looking at him, her face wet with tears, and disappears into the pre-dawn darkness. Jeroboam stands in the doorway watching her go. Benny enters his son's chamber, sits in the chair still warm from his wife's vigil, and takes Abijah's fevered hand in his own. The boy has slipped back into unconsciousness, his breathing labored, his face slack. "I'm sorry," Jeroboam whispers. "I'm so sorry. You deserved better. You deserved a father who was brave enough to trust God instead of golden calves. You deserved a kingdom built on righteousness instead of fear. You deserved, but what's the point of listing what the boy deserved? It changes nothing. Obijah still burns with fever. The kingdom still stands on foundations of compromise. And Jeroboam still sits in darkness holding his son's hand, waiting for a verdict he already knows in his heart. Outside, his wife walks the dusty road to Shiloh, wrapped in a worn cloak, looking like any other traveler. In her hand she carries a small clay lamp, practical, common, its flame barely strong enough to light her next step. It flickers as she walks, threatening to go out with every gust of wind, but somehow staying lit. A faint, fragile hope in the darkness Jeroboam has created. Behind her, the palace holds its breath. The servants move quietly, speaking in whispers. The physicians have given up, leaving only palliative care. The brothers circle, waiting. In a small chamber, a father keeps vigil over his dying son, powerless to do anything but watch and wait. The golden calves at Bethel and Dan stand untouched in the growing light, gleaming as the sun reaches. The kingdom continues its hollow rituals. The priests perform their appointed duties. The people bring their sacrifices. Everything looks the same from the outside. But in that chamber, a boy fights for breath while his father watches broken. And on a dusty road to Shiloh, a queen walks toward truth carrying a lamp that barely lights her path. A small, flickering flame in the vast darkness. The sun climbs higher. The day begins. The kingdom wakes to business as usual. But in Shiloh, in a prophet's dwelling, an old man with blind eyes already knows everything. The disguised queen coming, the dying boy left behind, and the judgment that has been waiting years to be pronounced. The flame flickers but doesn't die. Not yet. But the darkness presses close, and the wind is rising. The journey ahead will end with words that shatter whatever fragile hope remains. Jeroboam sits in shadow beside his son, waiting. His kingdom stands, but it's already hollow. His son breathes, but the breaths are numbered. His wife walks toward truth, and truth is always the thing that ends false hope. The house of Jeroboam is about to learn what it costs to receive everything from God and lose it trying to keep it on your own terms. The road to Shiloh stretches long and dusty under an indifferent sun. Jeroboam's wife walks with her head down, her cloak pulled close. The lamp extinguished now that daylight has come. Other travelers pass, merchants with laden donkeys, farmers heading to market, a group of Levites making pilgrimage south to Jerusalem. None give her a second glance. She's just another woman on the road, anonymous and unremarkable, exactly as intended. But inside, she carries a weight that has nothing to do with a small pack on her back. Every step takes her closer to a confrontation she dreads, closer to words she knows will cut like knives. Ahijah will see through the disguise, not with his blind eyes, but with the sight that matters. He'll know who she is. He'll know why she's come. And he'll tell her what she already suspects in her heart. The journey takes most of the day. By late afternoon, she reaches Shiloh, a town that once housed the tabernacle. That once stood at the center of Israel's worship, now diminished and quiet. The glory has moved to Jerusalem. The crowds have followed. What remains is a remnant, a memory, and an old prophet who refuses to leave. She asks directions from a water carrier, receives simple instructions. The prophet's dwelling is at the edge of town, a modest structure of mud, brick, and wood, distinguished only by its isolation. People respect Ahijah's privacy, or perhaps they fear it. Prophets who speak uncomfortable truths are venerated from a distance. She approaches slowly, her heart hammering. The dwelling looks ordinary. Worn door, small window, garden overgrown with herbs. Smoke rises from a cooking fire inside. She pauses at the threshold, gathering courage, rehearsing the lie she's prepared. She'll pretend to be a concerned mother from a nearby village. She describes symptoms without naming the patient. She asks generally about fevers and prognoses. She come in, wife of Jeroboam. The voice cuts through her planning like a blade through cloth. She freezes, her hand halfway to the door. The voice is old, cracked with age, but carries absolute authority. No question, no doubt, just statement of fact. Why do you pretend to be someone else? Her disguise, the worn clothes, the common appearance, the careful anonymity, crumbles like ash. Of course he knows. How could he not? This is Ahijah, who saw kingdoms rise and fall before they happened, who tore his cloak into 12 pieces and handed Jeroboam a destiny. This is the prophet whose words always come true. She pushes the door open with trembling hands. Inside, the dwelling is simple but clean. Arbs hang from rafters. Scrolls line one wall, and there, sitting on a worn mat near the fire, is Ahijah, ancient now, his beard white as wool, his eyes milky with blindness. He doesn't turn toward her when she enters. Doesn't need to. He's been waiting, he says, gesturing to a mat across from him. Not unkindly, but not warmly either. Just factual. She sits, her legs weak, her mouth dry. For a long moment, silence. The fire crackles. Outside, birds call to each other in the fading afternoon. Ahijah sits perfectly still, his blind eyes fixed on nothing and everything. She wants to speak, to ask her questions, to maintain some pretense of control over this encounter, but the words won't come. She can only wait. When Ahijah finally speaks, his voice has changed. No longer the simple greeting of an old man, but something else. Something that fills the small dwelling like thunder before rain. Something that makes the air itself feel heavier. This is no longer Ahijah speaking. This is the word of the Lord. I have been sent to you with bad news. The words land like physical blows. Not, I haven't answered your question. Not, let me examine the situation. Just bad news, already delivered, already certain. Elijah continues, and his voice carries the weight of divine judgment. Each word carefully placed, each phrase a hammer stroke. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. I raised you up from among the people and appointed you leader over my people Israel. I tore the kingdom away from the house of David and gave it to you. She sits frozen, hearing her husband's history recounted by the one who made it. The glory of it, chosen from nothing, elevated to kingship, given 10 tribes by divine decree, the magnitude of the gift, the impossibility of the grace, then the turn. Yet you have not been like my servant David, who kept my commands and followed me with all his heart, doing only what was right in my eyes. The comparison cuts. David, flawed, fallen, adulterous, murderous, David, still called my servant, because when confronted with his sin, he repented. When shown his error, he broke. When offered mercy, he received it with tears and transformation. David's heart, despite everything, remained oriented toward God. Ahijah's voice rises, the prophet's whole body now trembling with the force of the words he carries. You have done more evil than all who lived before you. You have made for yourself other gods, idols made of metal. You have aroused my anger and turned your back on me. The accusation is comprehensive. Not just that Jeroboam built altars, but that in building them, he did something worse than all previous generations, worse than the judges who compromised, worse than Saul who disobeyed, worse than Solomon whose heart turned to other gods in his old age, because Jeroboam knew better. He received direct prophecy, clear promises, explicit conditions, and he chose rebellion anyway. The queen's hands clench in her lap. She wants to defend him, wants to explain the political pressures, the legitimate fears, the complexity of the situation, but the words die in her throat because she knows, has always known, that the explanations are just sophisticated lies. Fear is not righteousness. Strategy is not obedience. Complexity doesn't erase clarity. Ahijah isn't finished. His blind eyes seem to pierce through the walls, through distance and time to see the palace in Shechem, the golden calves in Bethel and Dan, the compromised priests and corrupted worship and rotting moral fabric of the kingdom Jeroboam built. Because of this, I am going to bring disaster on the house of Jeroboam. Disaster, not warning, not opportunity for repentance. Disaster, already decided, already in motion. I will cut off from Jeroboam every last male in Israel, slave or free. Total elimination, not just the king, but his entire line, every son, every grandson, every male descendant who might claim the throne or carry the name, the dynasty that never was, the enduring house that could have been, would have been, if only reduced to nothing. I will burn up the house of Jeroboam as one burns dung until it is all gone. The imagery is deliberately crude, degrading, not the language of noble defeat, but of refused disposal. The kingdom Jeroboam built so carefully, protected so zealously, secured through such elaborate compromise, it will be burned like excrement, worthless and contaminating. Dogs will eat those belonging to Jeroboam who die in the city, and the birds will feed on those who die in the country. No honorable burial, no tomb of ancestors, no memorial, just bodies thrown to scavengers. The final humiliation, the erasure of legacy, everything Jeroboam feared about losing the kingdom, the loss of honor, the destruction of his name, the end of his line, all of it guaranteed by the very actions he took to prevent it. The queen's breath comes in shallow gasps. Her vision blurs. This is worse than she imagined. Worse than the worst scenario she'll let herself consider. Not just her son dying. All of them. The entire house. Everything. But Ahijah still isn't finished. His voice drops, becomes almost gentle, and somehow that makes what he says next even more terrible. As for you, go back home. When you set foot in your city, the boy will die. Precise. Specific. Timed the moment her foot crosses the threshold, not after she arrives and sits with him, not after days of declining health, the instant she enters the city. As if her very return triggers the mechanism of judgment, she tries to speak, to plead, but only a choked sound emerges. Ahijah continues, relentless and merciful at once. All Israel will mourn for him and bury him. He is the only one belonging to Jeroboam who will be buried, because he is the only one in the house of Jeroboam in whom the Lord, the God of Israel, has found anything good. The only good thing. Her Abijah, her gentle son, the boy who read Torah and prayed honest prayers and treated servants with kindness. The only one worth saving, and saving means death. The only one who gets a proper burial, and the burial comes now, while he's still a child. Before the corruption of his father's house can reach him, she understands, suddenly, with terrible clarity, what God is doing. This isn't just punishment, it's mercy. Abijah will die, yes, but he'll die clean. He'll be spared from seeing the full horror of what's coming, spared from becoming what his brothers are becoming, spared from the moment when dogs and birds feed on the house of Jeroboam. He's being taken home before home becomes hell, but understanding the mercy doesn't make it hurt less. She doubles over, a sob tearing from her throat. Her son, her baby, the good one, the hope, gone. Ahijah sits silent while she weeps, giving her space for grief. When she finally looks up, eyes red and swollen, he's not done. Moreover, the Lord will raise up for himself a king over Israel who will cut off the family of Jeroboam. Even now, this is beginning to happen. Not someday, not generations from now. Even now, the process already started. The next king already being prepared, the end already in motion, and the Lord will strike Israel so that it will be like a reed swaying in the water. He will uproot Israel from this good land that he gave to their ancestors and scatter them beyond the Euphrates River, because they aroused the Lord's anger by making a shear of poles. The judgment extends beyond Jeroboam's house, the whole nation, infected by the sin he introduced, destined for exile. The golden calves at Bethel and Dan are just the beginning. The compromise Jeroboam made for political security will ultimately destroy the political entity he was trying to preserve. The nation will be uprooted, scattered, sent into the very kind of exile Jeroboam once fled to Egypt to escape, and he will give Israel up because of the sins Jeroboam has committed and has caused Israel to commit. The final damning phrase, the sin of Jeroboam. Not just what he did, but what he caused. The ripple effect of one man's fear spreading through generations, infecting a nation, ultimately leading to catastrophe. The golden calves will stand long after Jeroboam dies, the pattern he established substituting convenience for obedience, politics for faithfulness, control for trust, will repeat through king after king until the whole structure collapses. The words hang in the air, final and absolute. There's no appeal process, no negotiation, no. But what if we change now? The verdict is pronounced, the sentence is sealed. The only question remaining is timing. The queen sits in shattered silence. Everything she came hoping to hear, some remedy, some sacrifice, some path to healing, has been incinerated by truth. There is no hope. There never was. The moment Jeroboam built the first golden calf, this outcome became inevitable. They've been living in the shadow of judgment for years without knowing it, like people in a house undermined by termites, thinking they're secure until the moment everything collapses. She thinks of her husband sitting beside Obishah's bed, hoping she'll return with good news, with some answer that makes everything manageable again. She thinks of Abijah himself, fighting for each breath, unaware that his death is mercy. She thinks of her other sons, cruel and calculating, who will die without dignity, their bodies left for scavengers. And she thinks of the golden calves, those beautiful, terrible statues, still standing in Bethel and Dan, gleaming in the sun, empty and cold and catastrophic. Can I? Her voice breaks. She swallows, tries again. Can I tell him anything? Is there anything he can do? Ahijah's expression softens slightly. Not with hope. There is no hope to offer, but with something like pity. Tell him what the Lord has said. Tell him that the God who gave him everything will take everything. Tell him that the kingdom built on fear cannot stand. Tell him the prophet pauses, and for a moment he's just an old man, sad and tired. Tell him it didn't have to be this way. She raises on shaking legs. There's nothing more to say, nothing more to hear. The audience is over. The pronouncement is complete. She moves toward the door, each step heavy, each breath painful. At the threshold, she stops and looks back. Ahijah sits by his fire, blind eyes staring at nothing, the weight of the message he carries bowing his shoulders. How many times has he done this? How many kings has he confronted? How many judgments has he pronounced? And how much does it cost him being the voice that brings truth no one wants to hear? Thank you, she whispers, though she's not sure what she's thanking him for. For truth, for mercy woven into judgment, for doing the terrible work of prophecy when silence would be so much easier. Ahijah nods slightly, acknowledging her departure, and then she's outside in the fading afternoon light, alone with the most devastating knowledge her mother can carry. She doesn't go immediately. She stands in Ahijah's overgrown garden, trying to gather herself, trying to figure out how to walk back to the city, knowing what her arrival will trigger. The journey here was desperate hope. The journey back will be a funeral march. The sun sinks lower. She needs to move. Abijah is dying, and whether she hurries or delays, the outcome is the same. But if she hurries, she might reach him before consciousness finally leaves. She might be able to hold him one more time. She might be able to tell him what God loves him enough to take him home before everything burns. She starts walking, slowly at first, then faster. The lamp is gone. She doesn't remember dropping it, but it's not in her hands anymore. She doesn't need light for this journey anyway. She's walking into darkness, carrying darkness, becoming darkness. The miles pass in a blur. Other travelers give her a wide berth. Something about her face, her walk, the way she moves makes people instinctively step aside. She looks like a woman carrying death, and in a sense, she is. Night falls. She keeps walking. The stars come out, indifferent. The road stretches on, each step bringing her closer to the threshold that will end her son's life. And in the palace in Shechem, Jeroboam sits beside Abijah's bed, waiting for his wife to return with answers. The boy's breathing has become more labored, the spaces between breaths longer. Jeroboam holds his hand and prays prayers that sound like accusations. Why this? Why him? Why not me instead? But he knows why. Deep in his heart, beneath all the denial and justification, he knows exactly why. This is what it costs to build a kingdom on compromise. This is what happens when you receive everything from God and immediately start rebuilding it in your own image. This is the price of golden calves. The night deepens. Jeroboam's head drops to his chest, exhaustion finally claiming him. He sleeps fitfully, still holding his son's hand, unaware that on a dark road miles away, his wife walks toward them carrying the words that will end hope forever. The house of Jeroboam stands for a few more hours. The golden calves gleam in moonlight. The kingdom sleeps, unaware that its foundation is already dust. And somewhere on the road between Shiloh and Shechem, a mother walks faster, driven by love and dread in equal measure, racing to reach her son before her own footstep kills him. Dawn breaks gray and cold. Jeroboam wakes with a start, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair beside Abijah's bed. For a moment he's disoriented, then reality crashes back. His son dying, his wife gone to Shiloh, the waiting that stretches like torture. He looks at Abijah. The boy's breathing is worse, shallow, irregular, each breath seeming like it might be the last. His lips have a blue tinge. His skin is translucent, the delicate network of veins visible beneath. Hold on, Jeroboam whispers, squeezing the small hand. She's coming. Just hold on a little longer. A servant enters quietly. Any sign of the queen? Jeroboam asks. A woman matching her description was seen on the northern road before dawn, my lord. She should arrive soon. Soon. The word hangs in the air like a blade. Jeroboam stands, paces to the window, stares out at the city waking below. The golden calf at Bethel is visible in the distance, a gleaming speck catching the morning light. Beautiful, blasphemous. He should tear it down, should have torn it down the moment the altar split. But he didn't, couldn't. Father, the voice is barely a whisper, but it spins Jeroboam around. Abijah's eyes are open, fever bright but conscious, focused. Jeroboam rushes to the bedside, kneels. I'm here. I'm right here. Is mother coming back? Yes, she's on her way. She'll be here soon. Abijah nods slightly, then with enormous effort. Father, the calves, they're wrong. You know they're wrong. Each word costs him. God gave you everything. You didn't need to be afraid. Tears stream down Jeroboam's face. I know, son. Not too late. Abijah's eyes lock onto his father's. Never too late. Tear them down. Come back. He's waiting. Promise me. I promise. Jeroboam chokes out. I promise I'll try. But Abijah's eyes have already closed. His burst of consciousness fading. The hand in Jeroboam's grip relaxes. My lord, the queen approaches the city gates. The shout yanks Jeroboam to his feet. He looks back at Abijah. The boy lies still, each breath a struggle. Something in Jeroboam's chest clinches with premonition. He doesn't want to leave because somehow he knows that when his wife crosses the threshold, something will end. He kisses Abijah's forehead and whispers, I love you. Whatever happens, know that I love you. Then he forces himself toward the main entrance. Servants scatter before him, reading his face, understanding that something momentous is happening. Jeroboam reaches the entrance hall just as the massive doors swing open. There she is, his wife, in simple clothes, dusty from the road. Her face a mask of grief so profound it stops everyone in their tracks. Their eyes meet across the hall. Without a word spoken, Jeroboam understands everything. The answers written in her posture, in the tears streaming down her face. She crosses the threshold into the palace, and in that exact moment, upstairs Abijah draws one more breath. then another, shallower, then one more, barely perceptible. His small chest rises and doesn't fall again. The struggle ends. The fever releases him. The boy slips quietly from this life, his death timed to the second of his mother's return. Just as the prophet said, a servant bursts from the chamber, her wail piercing the air. The prince is gone. Jeroboam's knees buckle. His wife stops mid-stride, her face crumpling, and releases a sound that's barely human, raw grief-given voice. Around them, the palace erupts in mourning. She pulls back, looks at him with eyes that have seen the end of everything. He said, "The Lord gave you everything, and because you turned your back on him, he's taking everything away." The boy's death is just the beginning. All of it, Jeroboam, all of your house, because of what you've done, because of what you caused Israel to do. The words land like stones, building a cairn over any hope that remained. Jeroboam doesn't deny them, doesn't argue. He just sits on the cold floor and lets the truth finally fully break him. All Israel mourns when the news spreads. People pour into the streets, wailing, tearing their clothes. Not performative grief, but real sorrow. Abijah represented hope, the possibility that something good could come from Jeroboam's reign. His death feels like the death of that hope. The burial is the next day. A tomb in the royal grounds, carved into rock. Jeroboam stands as his son's body is laid inside, wrapped in white, his face peaceful. The tomb represents what Ahijah promised. Abijah is the only one of Jeroboam's house who will receive a proper burial, the only one in whom God found anything good. As the stone is rolled across the entrance, Jeroboam understands the boy's death isn't just punishment, it's mercy. God took him home before the full horror could unfold, took him before he could be corrupted by what his father built. The loss was protection, the death was rescue. Jeroboam thinks of his promise, "I'll tear down the calves, I'll come back." Sincere when spoken's impossible now because nothing he does will change what's coming. The judgment is pronounced. But even knowing this, he hardens his heart. He tells himself, Ahijah is old, possibly senile. He tells himself that showing weakness would fracture the kingdom. He tells himself tearing down the calves would accomplish nothing. All lies, but lies he needs to survive. Weeks pass, then months. Jeroboam doesn't tear down the golden calves, doesn't reform the priesthood, doesn't acknowledge his sin. Instead he doubles down. More festivals, more priests, more elaborate rituals. His wife withdraws, spending her days in Abijah's old chamber reading the Torah scrolls he loved. When she looks at Jeroboam, her eyes hold an accusation sharper than words. She knows what he promised their son. She knows he's breaking it. His other sons slide toward fulfillment of Ahijah's prophecy. Nadab grows violent, positioning himself as the strong heir. The brothers scheme. The palace becomes a nest of vipers. The kingdom continues. People bring sacrifices. The golden calves gleam, but it's hollow, a dead thing animated by momentum. Everyone can feel the rot. One night, months after the burial, Jeroboam retrieves the cedar box. Inside the 10 pieces of torn cloth, faded, frayed, but still recognizable. "If you walk in obedience to me, I will be with you. I will build you a dynasty as enduring as David's." If the word that defined everything, the condition he ignored, he holds the cloth pieces and finally feels the full weight of what he's done, not just to himself or his son, but to an entire nation. The sin of Jeroboam, the pattern he established, the compromise that will echo through generations. "I'm sorry," he whispers. "I was afraid. I didn't trust you. I thought I had to secure what you gave me, and in trying to keep it, I destroyed it. But it's too late." The judgment stands. His house is marked, his son is dead, and the golden calves still stand. Jeroboam reigns for 22 years total, each one feeling longer than the last. When he finally dies, there's no dramatic repentance, just a tired man slipping away, his legacy already written. Nadab succeeds him and reigns for 2 years before being assassinated by Abijah, who kills every male in Jeroboam's line. The dogs and birds feed on their bodies, just as Ahijah said. The golden calves remained for generations, earning the bitter refrain that echoes through Israel's history. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the sins of Jeroboam, which he caused Israel to commit. But in a tomb in Shechem, Obijah rests in peace, the only one of his house to receive proper burial. While his father's legacy crumbles and his brother's borders rot, Obijah sleeps the sleep of the righteous. Because sometimes the greatest mercy is to take us home before we witness consequences of sins we didn't commit. Sometimes the loss is protection. Sometimes death is rescued. Sometimes the shortest life is the most blessed because it ends clean. Centuries later, prophets will summarize Jeroboam's reign in devastating simplicity. Remembered not for receiving a kingdom from God, not for liberating the tribes, but just for sin. The sin that destroyed him and echoed through generations until Israel was scattered, just as Ahijah prophesied. The final image, the golden calves still standing years after Jeroboam's death, gleaming in the sun, empty of presence, full of consequence. Beautiful monuments to the truth that you cannot receive everything from God's hand and rebuild it in your own image. Jeroboam received everything: a calling, a kingdom, a promise, a covenant that would have made his dynasty endure like David's. Everything. And he lost it all, not because God took it arbitrarily, but because in trying to keep it on his own terms, he destroyed the very thing he was trying to preserve. The story ends where it began, with choice. The choice to trust or to fear. The choice to obey or to compromise. The choice to believe that the God who calls you can also keep you, or to believe that you must keep yourself. Jeroboam chose fear, and fear destroyed everything. But the office still stands, echoing across generations. If you walk in obedience to me, I will be with you. What will you choose when God gives you everything? Will you trust him to keep it, or will you build golden calves to secure what he's already secured? If this story moved you, if you recognize Jeroboam's fear in your own heart, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share this with someone who needs to hear that God's gifts don't need your golden calves. They just need your trust, because the tragedy isn't what Jeroboam lost. It's what he never had to lose. If only he'd believed that the God who gave him a kingdom could keep it without his promise.